Disney Lorcana is one of the newest games on the market today, and it is fast paced and rising, and it's honestly growing way more than we could have ever truly imagined. But with that, there are so many questions. There are so many unanswered questions, and that's great because what you should be doing as players is asking questions. It's one of the best things to do to learn. Today, I'm here to give you 7 tips on building decks in Disney Lorcana, and we're going to get right into it right now. The 7 essential tips for deck building in Disney Lorcana. What are we building for? Synergy versus power, a balanced curve, deck necessities, proof of concept, refinement, and feedback. These are the 7 particular topics that I think will really sum up the entire process of building a deck in Disney Lorcana. Now, let's talk about it. What are we building for? And I know it's probably a silly question. We're building to play the game. Fine, totally agree with you. However, what are we really building for? Are we building for a competition that's coming up? Something that's very highly competitive that you are really hoping to succeed at? Or are we just building for a nice little homebrew to play at our weekly league play? Now, while they are 2 very different things to consider when building a deck for those different levels of competition, what I can say is that even though you may be building a low power level deck, there's still a way to do it well. And that's something I think most players don't really take into account when building decks. So I always ask anyone that's always asking me for an opinion of their deck is, what is this deck for? Is the deck for casual or competitive? Because when we take into that account, we have to understand that we have to make certain requirements depending on that. In casual, in all honesty, we can spend most of our time just doing what our deck wants to do, and we don't really need to care about what our opponent is trying to do. That's the way I like to think about casual. These are the perfect ways to play combo decks or unique, intricate synergy decks where it's just like, you know what, I'm going to do me, and I'm just not going to take into any account whatsoever of what my opponent's doing. And that's really where I like to land on casual. But for competitive, there are so many things that you have to consider when you're deck building. And we're going to cover those things in this, of course. But first and foremost, you have to look at the research. You have to look at the information that can be out there. And even as a new deck builder, there's so many resources out there at your disposal, so you don't have to actually start from scratch. However, when we are talking about competition, we are doing that because there's already been a tournament circuit revealed for Disney Lorcana. Pro Play Games and PPG Entertainment has already announced 3 different destination events this year, starting in Denver, then October in Miami, and at the end of the year in December, which Chapter 2 will be legal, all the way to GalaxyCon in Columbus. So there's definitely a reason to be building for competitive already this early in the game. Now, let's discuss how you can best utilize your ability to plan for this type of event well. Synergy versus power. So this is a really common entity in all card games. And a lot of times it's fairly even. Honestly, there's a scale that you can weigh out all these different types of things on, and most of the time you can come up to a pretty close weight and level of leveling these things out. But in Disney Lorcana, there are different types of synergy and there are different types of power. And within the restrictions of the game being only 2 inks per deck, you have to find the true, best way to interact with those different abilities. But first, if you are new enough, let's talk about really what synergy actually is in card games. Synergy is where 2 or more cards work together to achieve something better than the sum total of their independent effects. As an example here, Ariel, Spectacular Singer, has the ability of Singer 5 and the ability to search for songs when you play her. So the synergy of playing all of these cards together is making a card like Ariel well above the curve of most 3-cost characters. If she has the ability to come into play, find you a song to replace yourself with, and then also the ability to exert up the curve as a 3-cost to exert to play a 5-cost, you're even further ahead in the game, and you're getting so much out of the synergy of Spectacular Singer just by building your deck to understand that A, I want to find cards that I can sing with Ariel, and B, I want to get the most out of my cards that I can sing with Ariel. So synergy goes a long way in deck building when playing with certain cards. But let's talk about power. In the end, really simple, guys. Good cards are good. And what I mean by that is really simple. Synergy is a nice building block in any game. However, cards can be synergistic, but not powerful. When that happens, a problem arises. For example, a card like Ariel Holsa Collector looks like an incredibly synergistic card and kind of the engine to an entire archetype. However, she is a 4-cost uninkable character. She only has 3 willpower. She only has 1 lore. To get everything to go with her well, you need to truly set up an entire game plan, which again is where I go to. This is probably a casual deck. Now, can we build the best version of this deck? Absolutely, we can build the best version of this deck. But we have to understand that this type of deck is likely not going to succeed at a higher level competition of play because your opponent isn't going to just let you set up your entire board and do all these crazy things with an Ariel when realistically, at the very least, you have to be able to keep Ariel in play for an entire turn, which means your opponent has their entire turn to find so many plethora of ways to remove her. And with that, of course, we have to understand that good cards are good. And a card in this example, like a Tinkerbell Giant Great Fairy or an Elsa Spirit of Winter, these cards, you don't need synergy with these cards. They're just good. They're just powerful. When they come into play, they're going to interact with the board. They're going to do everything you want them to do, and they're not going to require anything else to be all that powerful. And that's what it means that in the end, good cards are good. Now, so far in this stage of Disney Lorcana, I personally can confidently say that most of the time in the game, the good cards that are good are a little bit better than the synergistic cards that are supposed to lend themselves to power. But cards like Moana, cards like Ariel Holset Collector, like while all these things are great, even cards like Tomateo to even help the Holset collectors, they just require you to have a lot of things go right. And they also require you to just like be left alone and for your opponent to not really do anything or pressure you in any way, which is a big key factor also when it comes to synergy, where yes, if your opponent just lets you keep a bunch of princesses in play and lets your Moana go off, then it's going to be very good. Yes, if your opponent lets you keep your Ariel Holset Collector and understands that you have a bunch of cards in your hand, they're going to Eye of Fate and all these things, then yes, it's going to feel very good. But when you realize that you're not going to do these things and you are preventing from doing things, that's where good cards become good. And honestly, what ends up happening is that you have to play a bunch of good cards in your combo-ish deck. And then what you do is you realize that instead of winning your games with Ariel Holset Collector, you're probably winning more games just because of Tinkerbell or Elsa. And that's pretty much the icing on the cake for good cards are good and synergy isn't always powerful. Hey guys, wanted to quickly interrupt you real quick. Just say, if you're enjoying the information, it's been helpful to you, smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, comment, let me know down below, what deck have you been brewing? What have you succeeded with? What hasn't worked? Let me know if you've had any struggles. A balanced curve. In any and all card games, there is some type of resource system that you have to abide by. It's very different across many different games that I've even played in my lifetime. But in Disney Lorcana, it's a pretty standard curve system. You gain normally on average, unless there's a specific card that helps you ramp, 1 resource a turn. And with that 1 resource a turn, there's even a restriction on the cards that you can utilize as resources. So even when you're planning your quote balance curve, you're actually still have to take into account many different things a part of that curve. But for those at home, let's take a little deeper of a look of what a balance curve actually is. In the game of Disney Lorcana, a curve is how your cards are spread over a resource cost. As you can see here in front of you, we have a 2 cost, a 3 cost, and a 4 cost. And in this particular game, the concept for all of these cards are the same. They are a cheap and efficient lore battery for your deck. Now, while I don't want to spend too much time on the deck list in general, and whether or not or how competitive it is, what I want to look at is the overall numbers of it. You can see here that this deck is a design curve to a certain point, and that point in this particular list is 6 resources. But how are we getting there, and what cards are we using effectively to even keep us on pace with others? You can see in the breakdown below that there are 10 1 drops, 14 2 drops, 9 3 drops, 12 and 12, 4 and 5, and then a lone 3 for 6. This is the balance curve associated to this quote aggro deck. Now, not every aggro deck is going to go to 6. Not every aggro deck is even going to go to 4. Not every control deck is going to stop at 8 or 10 or even 12. Every single deck that you build will be with this in mind, and it's going to be about how you approach the different levels of the game. For this deck, we are approaching it utilizing cards like Just in Time to kind of cheat out cards even faster and effectively, but also allow us to kind of cheat on curve. Having the ability to shift stitch for 4 and never pay 6 means that you don't necessarily even have to get to 5 resources. Now, while the game is played within your inkwell, you do have to consider how many uninkables in your list. Again, if we quickly look at this number, we can see that in this list, it's about 23% uninkable. Now, that seems like a lot because it really does force you into making particular plays and decisions very early on, which can be difficult. However, when you have cards that can help you cycle out, like Stitch, Rockstar, like Rapunzel, you have the ability to continuously move the game forward and like kind of a free flowing form to where you're always going to be able to ink what you want to. Even cards with the addition of Mad Hatter. Now, all of those things that I just said play into the concept of how many uninkables you can afford to run in your decks. And this is something that you're not going to know right off the start. In all honesty, what I would suggest is I would start high or start low. Instead of trying to guess the exact number, work towards a certain number. So if you think that you can play 25 uninkables, start your decks with 25 uninkables. The moment you can realize, like, okay, 25 is too high, let me cut 2, let me cut 2, let me cut 2. I don't think at this point in the game there is a particular yes or no answer to the number that any given deck of uninkables should have. Personally, I think it's going to be mostly a feel thing. It's going to be mostly a comfort thing. And it's going to be something that as you play the game, as you explore Disney Lorcana more and more, you're going to feel comfort with different levels. As an example, weeks ago, before the release of the game, I was already playing decks with 23 or 24 uninkables in it. So the deck that you just saw is a representation of what I'm most comfortable with because I know how to play the decks at that ratio. But again, maybe that's not for everybody. If we look at this list again, you can take a look and you say, oh, I don't know. Maybe I don't need 4 Just-in-Times. Maybe I don't need that 1 Mother's Know Best. Maybe I don't need that 1 Hades. And I can use those ratios to kind of up my inkwell. If that's what you have to do to start the game to get more comfortable playing with a given deck, then I suggest that you do that. And you work toward getting to a number that you're most comfortable with in building your curve. Deck necessities. What does a deck need? In my professional opinion, every deck needs some number of these 3 things. Some need all 3, some need 2, some need 1. But it definitely needs at least 1. What I mean by that is every deck needs a way to gain advantage. Every deck needs a way to interact with the board or board control. And every deck absolutely needs a win condition, which is why I said you need at least one of those things. You can make an argument that you do not need advantage. You don't need card advantage. You can make an argument that you don't need board control. A lot of aggro decks don't necessarily have those things, but those decks have a win condition, has a plan, it has a plan to action, it has something, a goal in mind when building. Most decks, and in most of history, the decks have all three of these things. So building a deck to your liking, whether it will be just a win condition, whether it will be just advantage and card advantage and utilizing those things, or whether it will be board control and a way to always, dictate the pace of play along the board control level, that is up to you as a deck builder to decide what is most important for the given option of the deck that you're building. But when you're building your decks, I'd absolutely keep these three things in mind and how I get those things. As you see here, I pointed out some of these cards. Friends on the Other Side and Hades are two very different versions of card advantage. Theoretically speaking, you could go to the extent of saying Zeus and Be Prepared are also a way to gain advantage in cards. All of these different things have this different ability. It's a matter of what type of deck you're building that requires a specific need. Cards like Friends on the Other Side, cards like Hades are natural influence to card hand to get ahead of your opponent that way. Cards like Zeus and Be Prepared are the opposite. They are to let your opponent get ahead in the game and then utilize your resources to force them into bad positions in the game later on. And then, of course, the win conditions. Win conditions are always the ever important and a way to win. And now I may have listed here Aladdin and Bell, but we can also make the same argument that Hades could be a win condition. The ability to get around a card like Be Prepared by later on in the game, you're like, okay, they just played Be Prepared. Great. I'm now going to play Hades. I'm going to get back the best card that my opponent Be Prepared. I'm going to play that too, and I'm going to be right back to pressuring my opponent. These types of things can happen over and over and over again, but no matter what your choice is in the game, your deck has to have a plan to interact with all three of these things. That's my humble opinion. Let's move on to the next. Proof of concept. Honestly, this week in the Discord, and if you haven't yet, join the Discord, it's in the description below, we had a wonderful conversation about the proof of concept and how I value it in card games. To me, a lot of the decks that you have seen highlighted on, YouTube, on Facebook, on Reddit, on Twitter, etc., 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 a lot of those decks are proof of concept. And what that truly means is this. How will you know, right? How will you know the deck that you're building is good? Well, first and foremost, you have to play games. And you have to learn from your losses and persistence. But all three of those things, they all kind of add up to something. And the general point is for proof of concept is that once you make a deck, and this is again different for every player, but for me, generally speaking, it takes me about 4 or 5 games to know if the deck actually has a chance of being competitive or not. Might not be true for every deck, but on average, I've been playing games long enough that I can tell that within 5 games, sometimes it's 3 games, sometimes it's 2 games, sometimes it's even 1 game, that I can make an assessment and go, nope, this is the wrong strategy. We got to get rid of it. For every new deck builder, it's going to take more and more time. But as you continue to do it, as you are persistent in your deck building abilities and keep working at it and keep getting better, all of those things will lessen and lessen and lessen, and this will all become easier and easier. But the only way you do that is by playing games with your deck. You can't make the best deck in the game without playing games with it. It just doesn't work that way. And the best way to build decks is to play games with just a proof of concept. And again, what that is, and what you're really likely to see, and this is my opinion, can be debatable, most decks in the game currently are 4 of everything. Maybe the occasional 3 of 3 of 1 of whatever it is. But most decks that you see are players going, I'm going to play 15 cards in my deck, and they're all going to be 4 ofs, and that's my 60 card deck. That oftentimes equates to a proof of concept. To get to that deck, to get to the best version of that deck, we need to be able to refine. So let's talk about refinement. Refinement. How will you know? Is the core concept good? What worked? What didn't work? What does it need? Now you can see this part of refinement can only happen through playing games. There's no way to know if the core concept is good without playing a game. There's no idea to know what part of the decks worked without playing games. There's also no idea how to tell if it didn't work without playing games. And of course, there's no way you're going to know what you need until you play games. So refinement is a very key core of deck building, but you only get there through playing the games. And that is a very vital, important part of all of this. Got to play games to learn from them. You got to learn from your losses. Honestly, you got to learn from your wins as well. But when you're starting in deck building, you need to take under the consideration that A, the deck you build isn't good. B, the deck you build is very incomplete. C, the deck you build definitely needs more work and needs a particular thing. And of course, you have to understand when to let it all go and just say, this doesn't work at all. I'm just going to start over with a different concept. And then maybe we'll table back to this with chapter 2. The last important thing in any deck building is feedback. Now, feedback can come in many forms. It can come from the players you're playing with at your local game store. It can come from players online that are reviewing your deck if you went to the extent of posting it online. It can come from, your friend that you talk Disney Lorcana with. But the real truth is that you need to be willing to listen. You can't become a better deck builder without taking feedback, without taking opinions, without understanding from the moment you post it that you could be wrong. You have to be able and have the ability to be criticized, and you have to really understand what criticism is best. And that's what's really difficult, in all honesty. It's about finding the criticism that actually helps you, because there are a lot of critiques out there that are not going to help you, that are not going to be informative. They're not going to have any real answer as to what you're even looking for. So the more feedback you let yourself take, the better you become also at taking feedback and understanding the good from the bad within feedback. If you're looking to join a community that is always willing to give feedback on any of the decks that you're building, I honestly suggest that you join our Discord in the description below. Also a link right here. If you're looking to become an even better, more competitive player, and you're looking to up your game that much more, check out our Patreon and see what we're offering for the upcoming 1K events and beyond. And lastly, if you're looking to stock up on those singles, take out your phone. If you're not watching on it, if you're watching on TV or a computer, the QR code takes you right directly to our TCG Player Pro page. Can't promise that it's all in stock, but what's there is definitely a way to grab your singles when in need. I truly hope that this video was able to help you become a better deck builder. For me, it is one of the more difficult things to truly understand as we learn a newer game. The addition of the inkwell and the addition of having a different route to winning through lore is a very tough thing to truly build around. It makes certain decisions in deck building even more and more difficult. I'm hoping that I was able to at least give you a good starting point in this video to understand the importance and kind of walk you through step by step on my process of how to build a deck. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I truly hope it helped you in every single way that you were looking for. If it didn't, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what else you might be looking for in videos like this. It'll help me better prepared to help you along the way in your Disney Lorcana journey. I've made several videos just like this one. You can check them out in the playlist right here or right here, wherever it may end up. Hope you guys enjoyed the day. I will catch you guys in the next video.